Welcome to this preview and discussion of Last Days in Vietnam, an Academy Award-nominated film detailing the heroic efforts of American Vietnam veterans and South Vietnamese to save as many lives as possible in the final days and hours of American involvement in Vietnam. The full version of Last Days in Vietnam premieres April 28th at 9/8 Central on your local PBS station. This event is presented by PBS Stories of Service, Veterans Coming Home, WGBH, American Experience, Nashville Public Television, Wisconsin Public Television, and the Independent Television Service, and is made possible by the support from the Center for Asian American Media and PBS. We're honored to be joined now in Nashville Public Television Studio A by two participants from the film who experienced those days in Vietnam nearly 40 years ago. First, Hugh Doyle, who was the chief engineer on the USS Kirk and is a retired commander in the U.S. Navy. And second, Binh Pho, who was a college student in South Vietnam during the war. Following the war, he spent a year in a re-education camp, but escaped by boat to Malaysia in 1978. He now lives in the U.S. We're also joined by Minh Sing, who as a 5-year-old survived the war by escaping first to the jungle and ultimately by boat to Malaysia at age 14. He arrived in the U.S. in 1985 and today is the president of the Vietnamese American community of Middle Tennessee. So finally, we have invited local Vietnam veterans from and around Middle Tennessee and members of the Vietnamese American community to share in this discussion. We will also be incorporating your comments and questions. This preview event is being streamed to 3 other live audiences gathered at Maryland Public Television, West Virginia Public Broadcasting, and the Oklahoma Network. If you would like to participate in the online chat using your smartphone, visit OVEE.itvs.org to find the screening and click on the chat box to join in. In addition, we have you, our online audience, joining us on OVEE, a virtual theater where participants can watch and chat live during the program. And now, I want to ask our panelists to put these experiences that we've just seen in perspective. Hugh Doyle, talk a little bit about, if this evacuation had never happened, these last days in Vietnam hadn't happened, what would have been your takeaway from the war? How did this change your experience of the Vietnam War?
Well, I was 1 full year in country in 1972. I was an advisor with the Vietnamese Navy. I was a psychological operations advisor. But when I left Vietnam, during the year I was there, we went from 12,000 U.S. Navy in country down to 1,200. It was called the Vietnamization period of the war. And I went on with my career. I went back, and when we deployed on the USS Kirk, the last thing we were thinking about was Vietnam. You have to remember, for those sailors in the audience here, you know what I'm talking about. You get inside the confines of a ship, and it becomes your world. Not much that goes on outside really affects you. But as we deployed, we were about 1 month into this deployment, and all of a sudden, Vietnam again. 1975, 3 years after I had left, 2 years after the Paris Peace Accords, and all we knew that we were going to be taking out some of the embassy people and a few key people. That's all we knew. But even on USS Kirk, we weren't planning to take anyone because we were there to protect the force. We were a destroyer escort, and there were about a dozen destroyer-type ships that were there. It never meant for any of them to take refugees, but as you saw in the film, we were overwhelmed with small helicopters, so we all took them. And,
yeah.
But I saw later, and you'll see it later in the film when you watch it on the 28th, we had to reflag those 32 ships before the Philippine government would allow us into the Philippines. And the reason they would not allow us in is they were still flying the gold flag of South Vietnam with the 3 horizontal red stripes. And it was no longer recognized by the Philippines. They had already recognized the communist government. So it was a political problem. When we lowered that Vietnamese flag on each of those ships at exactly the same time at noon on one day, it was a symbolic end. And it was a gut-wrenching thing for those 33,000 Vietnamese refugees. It really was. Yeah. So it marked the end of that war for me.
Well, I want to remind folks, raise your hand. We've got mic handlers that will take your questions. We also have Ron Pierce in the studio who will represent folks via OVEE. But Ben and Min, I want to ask you, these, of course, were not your last days in Vietnam. Ben, to you, what was it like as that helicopter was leaving for the last time? And tell us the story. How did you survive?
Well, that's a really loaded question.
Yeah.
It affected me so much that later on I create my artwork for that journey that I come here. So you have to imagine 40 years ago I'm a 19 years old kid, having worked a day in my life, and was in college, and all of a sudden the whole country was in chaos and panics and rumors everywhere. I went to the classroom, but the teacher not even there anymore. And nobody cared about school. And you can hear everything rumbling on the street of Saigon. So I made a few mistakes during those days. And whether those mistakes is good for me or bad for me, but I know now it was good for me. So I thought I was a pretty street smart kid, and I got myself into American embassy. Oh, by the way, I was not work for American or military, but I got myself in there, and just like Captain Harrington said, is the right mix of people get out, I do have a friend that worked for American, and she's trying to get her family out, and I just kind of joined their family. But at the moment that I stepped my foot inside American embassy, you wouldn't believe how good I feel. I felt great. And okay, I made it. I hope mom and dad in Can Tho would made it. I don't think this clip showed Can Tho, because Can Tho is about like a capital of the South Vietnam. It's about 200 miles south of Saigon. That's where my dad stays, and he's a Navy officer. That's why he had to get out. And so, and the day go by, and about 18 hours later, when I realized that the noise in the American embassy is totally changed, very noisy, a lot more people come in, the Marine is gone, and Hank, there's nowhere to be found. And I said, well, I think we kind of got stranded. So we look around, and I still saw a couple of Western face, which is probably, I think I know later on was journalists or something, but they don't want to leave, they just want to stay there. So panic, scared. I was so scared that I don't even know what to think. But I talked to my friend and said, well, the company will come soon. The last thing you want to do is be in the American embassy without a gun. So get the heck out of here. So I got out. Now I see I made another bad decision. I should go to the boat dock instead to go back home. If I went to the boat dock, I would have got out too. But since I got the floor, I want to just tell you the rest of them, because, you watch the whole movie, you can see the tragic. It's really happening. Stuart Harrington have no control over who go and who not. He just tried to get people out. The ambassador have no idea who got on the helicopter, is the right mix. So, and the President Ford and Henry Kissinger, they have no idea what's happening in the American embassy. So nobody really know or decide who goes, who got left behind. And to me, at that time, I felt the reason I got left behind is destiny. I just didn't mean to get out on that day. So it doesn't matter how hard I try, I would stay there for 4 years. And those 4 years taught me a very valuable lesson. Like everybody talk about freedom, the freedom we would love to have here in this country. And we had it for a while, even though during the year in Vietnam, I born during the war. But I have a taste of freedom there, because I feel like wherever I want to go to college, I go. Wherever I want to go, I go. I don't have to ask anybody permission. And all of a sudden, that freedom lost in one day. And all of a sudden, when you feel that, you feel, what did I just lose? And all of a sudden you feel that how precious that freedom for a human, you know. So when I got back to America again in 1979, I would say 78, I escaped out to Malaysia, but I stuck there for 8 months. So I did not get to St. Louis to unite with my mom and dad in May 7th, 1979. And that feeling that I got my freedom back, it was so great that I appreciate it every day. So every day I wake up in this country and I felt the freedom with my fellow Vietnamese Americans and we here in this country. So I thank you for all the veterans that sacrificed in Vietnam. I was with Stuart Harrington at the war in Washington, D.C. 2 days ago. It's very emotional for me, and I very value that. So those 4 years was bad, but actually it's good for me. I value that so much that I thank the Harrington that left me behind. But I do hold him for one thing though. Every time I'm with him, if he say he go take a look, I follow him. I would not let him get out of my sight.
Well, Ron, before we get to Ron real quick, Min, just share with us a little bit. I mean, you were 5 years old. What do you remember of that time?
I remember is one day is my mom hold my hand, walk down to my grandfather's house. And, you know, I feel I'm too young. She tried not to tell me much, but I feel it's something wrong. And I remember in this small village, we have to walk. And I remember it's long walk, at least a couple miles. And when I came over my grandfather's house, I saw all kind of weapon in the front of my father's front yard, and a lot of the military clothes. And I know what happened. I feel it's scary, and I feel everyone is very irritated, and it's fearful cover the whole village from that day. And that's why I remember it.
Ron, it sounded like you have a question from someone at OVEE.
I do. 2 questions. First, from Rhonda in Wisconsin for you, Ben. She wants to know if you could share with us what a re-education camp was like. What was that year like for you? And then maybe for you, Commander Dar, from Eli in San Francisco, he would like to know if the other embassies, our combatant allies, if they evacuated their embassies in a similar way, or if anyone can share stories about that, how they evacuated. Ben?
The re-education camp is actually, it's a fancy word for prison in communist country. I don't think any even Russia or China or Vietnam, they don't call it prison, they call it re-education camp, because they try to, if you do something wrong, and the government would try to keep you there and indoctrinate you and teach you how to understand the communism. And then when they feel like you understand and you kind of like graduated, and then they will let you go. So the time you're there is unlimited. It just depends on how you are cope with the situation. And the condition, I did have that question from the high school in Chevy Chase a couple of days ago. They asked me the same question. It's very hard to describe, so I just make it very photographic for you. The education camp in Vietnam, it make the worst prison in the United States like a country club. So even you stay in the worst prison here, compared with that, they still are really good. So the food is not standard. You don't have enough food to eat, and it's very. I guess that you probably can get there. And as for the other embassy, different country, I think most of them will come to American embassy, the smaller one. But the Germans or I don't know, there's a couple more other ones, they have their own helicopter, but they all end up somewhere in the fleet, unless some of them already move ahead of time with the airplane of evacuation. But very few of them left. American Embassy is the only one that big enough and that have enough employee to stay there to get evacuated.
Just to elaborate on it a little bit, the other embassies didn't wait as long as we did. We waited until Tan Son Nhut was holed. They hit it with artillery, and so we could no longer fly fixed-wing aircraft out of Tan Son Nhut. That's why all the helicopters, the helicopter lift you saw was the fourth and the least desirable of the options they had, as you'll see in the full-length movie on the 28th. Most of the other embassies didn't wait as long as we did. They got their people out when you could still get them on Pan Am and Lufthansa. They flew them out. There was one embassy that I'm pretty sure was still, there were some South Korean embassy people that were left behind. They were left behind in the embassy as part of that 420. There were a couple South Korean diplomats that were left. But other than that, I think they didn't wait as long as we did.
You know, one question I have, we've worked on a series called Next Door Neighbors, looking at refugee resettlement in the United States, and it was the Vietnamese Americans that really brought in the modern era of refugee resettlement. And I wonder, like, how did people know to try to escape by boat, you know, to get to Malaysia, like that process of which eventually made, of course, the Vietnamese Americans that become what we now know as the boat people. Talk a little bit about that specific journey and how that came to be.
You want me to, or you want?
You go ahead.
Both of you, yeah, go ahead.
It's a very good question, Will. You know, you can look at the Vietnam map. So I tried by foot the first time, and we try to stay away from Cambodia because we don't want to face Khmer Rouge. Those guys even worse than the Vietnamese communists. So, we went up to Pleiku, which is in the middle of the country, and we cut across Laos so we can get to Thailand. But that's about 45 miles in the jungle. That's not very easy task. But we got caught right away in the first few days, and that's when I got in a re-education camp. But after that, so I feel like, you know, jungle is not easy. Like we think maybe the ocean would be better because you look at Vietnam map, most of them is coastline. If you go straight out, if you're in the middle of the country, you hit Philippines, and you go a little bit south and west, and you hit Malaysia. That's the two closest spots you can have. If you got a bigger boat, you probably could go down to Australia, but I don't think you want to go that far. However, in the beginning, it's very, very controlled by the new government. So, like, especially my boat, only got 39 people. 3 little engine boat, fishing boat. And when we got shot, when we got out, and we got a couple of holes in there, we had to bail the water out as we go. And according to the BBC, during that 76 to 77, that only 1 out of 6 boats float out there in the South China Sea will get escape or succeed. The other 5 will get either sunk, got robbed by the pirate, or got killed, whatever. Because in about 2 years, the Malaysia and Thailand, it doesn't mean talk bad about them, but there's a lot of pirates that instead of go fishing, they realize that the boat people carry a lot of gold with them. Because when you leave the country, you're going to try to melt your gold and make do something else and bring it with you. And that become a gold mine for the pirate. And so many boats got robbed, raped, killed, whatever, you know. My boat was very lucky. When the first time we saw a Thailand fishing boat or Malaysia's fishing boat, they don't even rob us. We actually asked for a cigarette. So that how we didn't ask for water, but we asked for cigarette. That's how dumb we are. But anyway, that was sort of kind of funny joke there. But we got into that, and we stayed in that island for 8 months, like I said. But in about close to the end of '78, all of a sudden one day I saw a boat come in, huge boat, 500 people in it. So I just curious myself. I came out and talked to them. How do you manage to get 500 people on this boat? Because my boat, 39 people, we had a tough time to load people. And then the following day, there's another boat coming with 500 more people, and they just load up that island. So I realized that those are the boat that was organized by the government, because they start to realize that why we want to keep these people? They want to leave the country. If you want to leave, you give all your property to us, you can leave. And they just put these people onto the boat like a sardine and just ship them out. And then finally, somebody realized that, and I think America got involved with that too, step the foot down and say, we're going to take these people back to Vietnam, and you can't punish them. You have to go give them back the thing and whatever. So that was the end of the boat people era.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ron, we got another question coming from OVEE.
Yes, from San Francisco, Smith, the director at Hugh. She's curious, or he's curious, if you've had a chance to speak with later generations of vets who've served and are currently serving, do they deal with the same internal conflict of wanting to save those on the ground in their own conflict zone? And then I'd also, if you could share, I heard you share this story before, about the sea between Vietnam all the way to the Philippines, how unique that was.
Right. Let me start with that one. The South China Sea is not known to, as a lake. It can be really rough. And that's particularly at that time of year, into the spring, it can be really rough. We had 32 Vietnamese, really decrepit Vietnamese Navy ships with, depending on whose number more than 30,000. I think we've settled on about 33,000. But we went from Con Son Island to the Philippines, and it was literally like going across a lake. And when you saw those ships with everyone out on the main deck, and all the babies and the little children, if we had rough seas, if we had a storm that we would have lost hundreds or maybe even thousands of them over the side. We would have been unable to pick them up. It would have been too many of them. We only had three medium or small, two destroyer escorts and an LST with us, U.S. Navy, and three fleet tugs, that size of ship, because we thought they weren't going to make it. We thought we'd have to tow them. But we didn't have enough. If we had a catastrophe with people falling over the side, the other part of it would be seasickness. Those of my fellow sailors here, you know, if you've had a bout of seasickness, you know how miserable that can be. If we had rough seas, we would have had dehydration with those refugees. They had already been at sea. They had already been away from land for up to a week or 2 weeks before we even picked them up. So they were in bad shape when we picked them up. So we talk about this, my fellow crewmen, we say, look, if you didn't believe in God then, you do now, because God made that work. And the other question?
Have you spoken to other veterans, and did they feel a sense of internal conflict trying to save?
Okay, one thing USS Kirk had a crew of 275 men. It was all men back then. Approximately 250 enlisted men, 25 officers. I had the largest department, the engineering department. I had 88 men in the department, and more than half of them were still teenagers. We had 3 men on the ship who were there with their parents' permission. They were kiddie cruisers. They were signed on at 17 years old. So and I don't care what war it is, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, the Second World War, you can count on a young American military man to do what needs to be done. And the captain, Paul Jacobs, he said he couldn't have been more proud of that crew. Me too. I mean, they were great. They felt deeply for the plight of the refugees coming out of there, and they couldn't. They just, every single one of the 275 men, there wasn't one slacker, there wasn't one gold bricker in the bunch. They all got right into it. So.
We've got a question from the back of the room with the mic handler there.
Yes, my name is Zachary Bell, and I'd just first like to say to all you Vietnam veterans, thank you for your service and welcome home. My question to the entire panel is, what would all of you say that you feel is the biggest misconception or misunderstanding or not known about the Vietnam War at large? Thank you.
I couldn't hear that.
I didn't, I'm sorry.
I think we had a little trouble hearing you, Zachary.
I think the mic might have a problem, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so what would you I don't.
Yeah, just yell it out.
Okay. So what would you say that all of you feel is the biggest misconception or misunderstanding of the Vietnam War conflict itself? Like, I served in 2 tours of Afghanistan, and some could argue that it's widely publicized, right? 'Cause of information technology. But as far as the Vietnam War, I feel that there's this huge gap to when people who are in the military, like myself, I learned about it, but the public at large just doesn't know or understand. And what would you say that would be, or where that conflict stems from?
That's a tough question. I think what they don't realize that they think that we were a bunch of people who didn't want to go, right? They were Vietnam veterans didn't want to go, right? Some didn't, but some did. A lot did. We were there for 365 days. Those of you who were there, you know the short timer chain. You chop a link off it every day that you're there. And it was, but what they don't realize is we really had a job that we were doing. And the Vietnamese American community, I think, understands that better than most Americans, non-Vietnamese Americans, citizens do. They knew what we were doing there. Many of our Vietnam veterans didn't relate or didn't interact closely with Vietnamese citizens while we were there. We were in units. We were in infantry battalions, and we were in Marine Corps units. I was fortunate enough to be an advisor, so I worked closely with the Vietnamese, my counterpart, and I got a good dose of Vietnamese food and Vietnamese culture and Vietnamese religion and everything. But most of our guys went there. You were there for 365 days doing good things, and then came home. And unfortunately, a lot of guys didn't really get to interact with the Vietnamese populace when they were there, other than in a kind of a peripheral way. I think it's great nowadays that we have events like this, where we have Vietnamese American citizens and we have Vietnam veterans here, and we can see we're real people. We were doing a job that needed to be done. It was a job that wasn't appreciated, and all of you guys know when you came home, it was some of you particularly going to Middle America. Where I came home to San Diego, a Navy town, so it wasn't so bad for us. But for those guys going home where there was not a lot of military in your hometown, you were told, you better not wear your uniform when you get off the train, you know. And that was wrong. It was dead wrong. We were doing the right thing while we were there, and I think it's about time we took a few bows for it. So.
Another question from the audience. First to you, and then we've got another one here. Go ahead.
I've got a question that's haunted me for many years. It's related to the re-education camps that you spoke about.
Yeah.
And that is, did the communists enact a bloodbath on the top South Vietnamese government officials as well as civilians at the end of the war, 75, when we were out?
Well, there's no secret there. Is all the military officer that left behind is collectively, one by one, village by village, little town by little town. In the middle of the night, they knock on the door, take you away, and your wife have no idea where you're going. So, fortunately, my mom and dad and the whole family got out. So I'm lucky enough, I'm the only one that left behind, and I'm very thankful for that. My uncle is not in the military. He's professor at the university. So, but I know there's so many of the people that I know. Actually, my cousin, father, he's a major in the Air Force in Vietnam. And actually my father-in-law, future father-in-law, like that, I didn't know him back then. And they both went to re-education camp for, one of them for 5 years, the other one for 7 years. So one-on-one somehow, because you have to remember, there's no computer back then, okay? Everything by file and everything by word of mouth. So if you try to hide it, you can see the whole length movie, you can see the soldier that take off the uniform and wear underwear and try to hiding it. But the new government would key on the officer first. If you're an officer, somehow they find out by your neighbor or by other people, and they would knock on the door and they say, you with me, and then they take you away. The spouse probably wouldn't know about it, where he went for years later, you know. And then they get to officer first, then they got to a little corporal and sergeant, and then it just comes down the line. Then CIA, people work for CIA like Dan Pham, in big trouble. Because those guys can be in there forever. I think he served 13 years. Yeah. So it just depends on how do they think, how bad are you connected with American, that how long you can be serving in that re-education camp.
Another question from the audience over here.
I guess what I want to do is comment on the Afghanistan, why people misunderstand our war. The atmosphere at that time is most of the people back in the States were totally against the war. And a lot of the news media picked that up. And like many of us here, when we got home, we were spit upon and I don't know how many years it went before we were recognized. And so I think what we did for the people that came after us, the public finally woke up and said, these men went and did what they wanted, but the country asked them, and that's different than your opinion about the war. And so from what we gave them, they've given much more positive feedback for the soldiers since then, because the country realized they made a major mistake in not recognizing soldiers and what they do for the country. So I think that's a big way. I think that's what we've given to the Vietnam veterans, given to future veterans.
I'd like to add something to that. You notice in many of the large airports throughout the United States, when men come back from Iraq, well, now Afghanistan, they're met by veterans who welcome them home. Mm-hmm. You guys, veterans of I'm 70 years old, veterans of our generation, welcome these young men home, men that could be our grandsons. And that's what we didn't have in the 60s and 70s. So I think what you all are doing here for our modern day veterans coming home from the sand is a wonderful thing. And I think that's going to continue on. I hope it does. Yeah.
We've got another question here from the audience, please, if you'll contribute.
I just want to say that in 1973, I was on the Enterprise, and when the peace fire occurred, and about a year and a half later, we were back in Vietnam, and we'd been on cruise for about 7 months, and it was time to go home. We were headed back and getting close to Hawaii, so we were getting close to getting back. The ship started to slow down, and then it went dead in the water. And then we heard the captain announce, "We're turning around. I'll tell you more later." So now we could smell home. We were that close. We were later, a couple days later, we were going to find out that we were going to be involved in evacuating Saigon. And we couldn't have spent the next 6 weeks in a better way. And this documentary helped me now understand even more about what we did there. Thank you.
Man, I want to bring you in a little bit to the conversation. Talk a little bit about, you spent some time in the jungle. Eventually you were able to also make it by boat. What was your situation then as a young 14-year-old and making that treacherous journey?
Yes, I remember back about 80, I start, grow and see they isolate my family, the communists, and very much they watch every moment of our families. And I feel I have no life, no hope. And it's that why is one day my father, he got out of jail and he come over and talk with family, very small talk. He says, well, somehow you have to get out of the country. And my family has 10 brothers and sisters. And my oldest brother, he escaped the country back in 1980. And we set it up, and my father talked with the gentleman. He have a small fishing boat. And we gathered together, and one day we set it up. I just sneak out the jungle and get on the ocean. And we get on the boat, including his family, my sister, myself, and my cousin, and 11 people. And we cross Pacific Ocean. We on 3 days and 2 nights. And finally, I landed in Malaysia in 1985. And they put it in a refugee camp. I stayed in refugee camp for 7 months.
Is that Pulau Bidong?
Yes, I stayed there for them. Yeah.
Still? Oh.
Yeah. And it's 30 years already, but it seemed like yesterday to me. And I always thank you. I think God has saved my life. Because I remember that day when we got on the boat, we got on the ocean about, I think about 11 or 12 o'clock in the noon, and about 3 or 4 hours later, I saw some clouds on the sky, and looked like we have a storm coming. And I can feel it. It take about next 30 minutes, and storm coming. And I saw the big wave coming, and I can count out it. You can feel it. 10, 8, 9, 5, and the big wave just hit the boat, a small boat. And I feel it. The first time I feel it, that, I tell myself, we're going to die. No way we can survive. And first time in my life, I don't know how. I just need out and pray God. I say, God, if you save my life, what I do, I will to do something for my family, and I do something for my country. And it seems like it's the amazing thing. And the first wave hit the boat, and all I see is just water. And I feel it's anointing run from my head to my toe. It's run up and down, and I feel my body warm. And inside of my heart is have an inside voice come out, say, you're not to die, you're not to die. And I start gaining back my confidence. And just the second wave, third wave just hit the boat. And it's amazing. After the storm, and you can feel the sea is completely look like very transient and no wave. And I remember forever. And that's why when I met someone or somebody tell me to tell story, how can I get America, I told people, I said, God saved my life, God sent me to America. It seems like not by luck. It's something amazing, something is unseeable, is God hand to send me to America. That's why I always appreciate, to last 30 years, I try to do whatever I can to give back to the community, give back to America, and give back to people back home. That's why I step up, and we have a group of our people here to support me, to work together. That's why we build the Vietnamese American community to do whatever for our people and our community here and back home.
Ron, another question from OVEE participants.
Yes, we're wondering, Minh and Ben, have you all had an opportunity to return to Vietnam? And if so, How do you feel about the relationship between the U.S. and Vietnam now?
Yes. The first time I went back to Vietnam is 1991. It's when that farm, from that time we not live the embargo yet. But I went back, I left the country in 1985. I come back 91, very possibly about 8 years later. I thought something would change, but it got worse and worse. And I look at my friend. I met a couple of friends when I went to school together. I go back to my village, and I tell myself, man, I'm so lucky to live in the United States, and I have a freedom. I have an opportunity. I can do whatever I want to do. And second year, I keep come back one more time in 92. And 97, I come back one more time, and I say we have to do something. And I come back to the United States. I told myself and I told my father, I have to do something. And from 1991 from now, I'm the one that I call the freedom fighter. I do whatever I can. And of course, right now, I believe the communists put me in a blacklist, but I'm proud because I do the right thing. I want Vietnam. I look back, is even 1997. I think in 1995 we have a lip embargo, but it's for the communist government. The citizens still hungry, still fear, they still have no life, still, even just last week. And especially about 3 years ago, I involved on the freedom religions a lot. I work with the Cao Dai religion back home, and Vietnam have no freedom religions. Just last week on April 15, they seen thousands of the police and the third and the condo come over, is completely destroy the Cao Dai temple on the Ti An, Phu Quyen, just currently, and they still doing that. It seems like they are saddened. They against God. They don't like everyone believe in God. They destroy the belief, and they keep doing it. And I got all kind of evidence day by day. It happened every day. It still continuing that day, today.
Ben, what about your experiences? Have you
I'm
gone
a little
back?
bit more chicken than men. I didn't go back until I didn't go back until 2000, until President Clinton lifted embargo. And then that United Airlines historic flight from U.S. to Tanzania Airport, the one that they destroy when they come in. They fix them all up now, yeah. So I didn't went back until 2000, and my idea about fighting is a little bit different than men. I just tell the story through artwork rather than violent, because even before when the war is happening, I'm probably the one question we ask me, Ben, you 19, how come you're not in the military, right? In Vietnam back then, after you graduate high school, you have to take a test, the whole country. All the 12th grade students have to take a test. You have to pass that test to a certain grade, and then you can stay in college. You fail that test, you got drafted to go to the military. And I proudly said I passed that test, and that's why I stayed in college instead of got drafted. So I want to confirm with what some of the men said. Yeah, what happened is, the one thing about religions is I had a friend, and he's here now, but back then he's still in Vietnam. And he was born in the South. So he never have a taste of the communism. So his family, the whole family was farmer and live in the South. And he don't believe in leaving the country, so he stay. And he worked in the bank, and he do a very good job at the bank. And one day his boss told him, Yung, you very good branch team leader. I want to promote you to manager of this branch. But one thing, the requirement is you had to join the party, which is the Communist Party. Well, okay, I joined. Well, not so fast. If you want to join the Communist Party, there's one thing that you have to do for me. What is that? You can't go to church. He's Catholic, right? So, what do you mean? Yeah, if you join the Communist Party, you can't go to church. You can't be Catholic. So he refused to join the Communist Party, and a few years later, he came here. His daughter's here. Tried to sponsor him, but he didn't want to leave until that day. That he draw the line, so he left. So yeah, there's no religious there. Now, if you go to church, they wouldn't arrest you, but you're not going to hold any important position in the society. Now, what Min said is a little bit more extreme that I haven't heard, but he went back to Vietnam a lot more than I do. That only one time I went back, and so.
We've got time for a couple more questions from the audience. I've got one right here.
I kind of have a talk about behind it, the men, and I'm say thank you American West. I'm thank you American die in my country. I think some people here older, we remember your friend die in my country. You make your friend behind you. You love and Vietnamese U.S. Army in my country. Right now, before 1995, my country the freedom. Right now, my country communist. You know the communists, they say terrorists. Right now, my country, the children, 7-year-old, they sell the ticket, lottery, for to go to school. Some people are American. I'm thank you when my family coming here. Right now, I have 2 children. One children, the first one go college. One the children go high school. My country, a lot of my family no go to school. No working. They need to have a lot of freedom. Thank you, American. Come in my country, a lot of people die. Thank you, American. Have my country freedom. Talk your governor. Have my country right now. Thank you.
We hear a lot about the lessons of Vietnam, and the people, though, doing the talking about that are usually the politicians and the TV pundits. We have people here, obviously, veterans and the South Vietnamese who, what, with 40 years of perspective, what is the lesson that we as Americans can take away from the war in Vietnam?
You want to take that?
I'd like to say thank you for the question, but tough one. It's a tough one. I think the lessons are individual lessons. I think I'm not trying to dodge your question, but every one of us has a different answer to that question. For myself, I was first there in 1968 and 69 aboard ship. I went back in 72 in country. Went back in, of course, in 75 for the evacuation, and then later on in 1981 for 3 different boat people lifts on USS Fanning, where we rescued about 130 boat people, refugees. I think for myself, I grew up. I was a kid when I was commissioned. I grew up on in 1975 during those 9 days across. I think every one of us, the Vietnam veterans who are here, can have a similar story that you grew up. You went away as a kid and you came back as a man. So that's why I think I'm not going to even approach the political answer to that question because I don't know that there is an answer to that question. Let's just not do it again the way we did it. I would hope that some of the lessons that we did carry from Vietnam that we're going to use today. How do we evacuate the embassy in Baghdad, the largest embassy in the world for the United States, 1,000 employees, not Iraqis, American employees, and it's 265 miles from the water. How do you do it? It was a 1-hour round trip with a helicopter. We've got 3 ships there now with about half a dozen of these really fancy V-22s. We couldn't do it. There's no way to get them out. So we can't wait as long as we did. We have to make a decision. Someone in the State Department or somewhere has got to make a decision when it's time to go. Don't wait like the ambassador in Vietnam did, because then we were forced into the worst of all situations, was the helicopter option. But to go back to your original question, what are the lessons? I can only tell you the lessons that I took from it, and every Vietnam veteran sitting here, every citizen sitting here took a lesson from that war. You didn't have to be a Vietnam veteran to do it. My father was a World War II and Korea veteran. He took a big lesson from the Vietnam War too. He had 3 sons that went. We all came back, all in one piece. One of them unfortunately joined the Army, but the other 2 went in the Navy.
Last question from the audience.
Oh.
A comment?
Yes. I went back in 2006, and that was my first return, which was a good thing for me to see, deal with some PTSD issues and look at Vietnam in a different light and so forth. Our base camps were still there and so forth. A lot of things I did learn that you were talking about, the re-education camps, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And the ARVN soldiers that were left behind, the communists wouldn't let them work. Their children had to work for them. And then any ARVN soldier's child could not go to college, which caused more of an exodus in '91 and so forth and since then. So to have you here explaining some of the other stuff and what you've gone through, especially as the boat people, I've learned a lot about that. So in answer to the gentleman's question over there, let the military go in and win the war. Don't tie our hands behind our back. Whatever war we're going to do, go either win it or don't go. It's going to be that simple. Unfortunately, it's not. And you know, you kick up the war machine, everybody wants to make money. So you got 2 variables hitting there and smacking against each other. But we're now, as Vietnam veterans, able to take and appreciate the younger generation of coming back and not go through the hell that we went through when we came back. Thank you all for your input and everything else.
Thank you. And we've run out of time. I want to give a great thanks to our panelists and to the Vietnam era veterans that have joined us. Thank you for your continued service and sacrifice. I also want to thank the members of the Vietnamese American community here tonight. You have enriched our nation with your lives. And thanks to all of you for taking time to reflect on the events of almost 40 years ago, to remember those lost and recognize the lives that have been changed ever since. I hope you will tune in to the complete version of the film, Last Days in Vietnam, when it premieres April 28th at 9, 8 Central on your local PBS station. Thank you, and good night from Nashville.